Hello and welcome back to another episode of Volley Takes. I'm your host, Abby, and I'm smiling so big this morning because I officially have a new camera that I'm going to be recording the rest of Volley Takes on indefinitely. It's going to have much better quality as far as, when I upload it to YouTube, which I'm going to start doing, uploading to Spotify, all of that kind of stuff, and you guys get to actually watch Volley Takes and not just listen to Volley Takes. I mean, if you listen to it, it's fine, but you can watch it. So that's why I'm super excited, but I'm also super excited just because of the amazing NCAA tournament that we have had so far this season. And yeah, I don't even know where to start because past podcast episode, the bracket had just been created. So we've gone through 4 rounds of the NCAA tournament, which is just so many matches. And I can't get to a breakdown of every single one, but I'm going to be highlighting some of my favorites, some of the really awesome matches, and also just going into the Elite Eight and just some of those matchups. And yeah, I'm going to give you I actually have some hot takes for this episode. So definitely stay tuned. But we're going to start with sort of a full picture recap of the first 4 rounds of the NCAA tournament. And I'm actually surprised. So, first of all, my bracket did so bad. I could not, I probably am in last place out of all the brackets that have been created. I picked good upsets, and sometimes those upsets won, but then sometimes they didn't. And I'm just gonna kind of do a full capsule of the tournament. So I think first round we had some really good matchups, starting with Ole Miss upsetting or starting with Loyola Chicago upsetting BYU in straight sets. I mean, I don't think you could start the NCAA tournament any better as far as, the parity goes and just seeing a super awesome upset. I still think that's like the quote unquote biggest upset of the tournament. And I think it still is. And that match was just really awesome because we saw a really small, undersized team beat the big guns from BYU, and it was incredible. And it was kind of the start of how the Big 12 teams ended up doing in the tournament, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit. But we then had a really good match that I watched between Georgia Tech and Tennessee, which that one went 5. And at the same time as that match, we had Ole Miss and Florida State. So we had 2 SECs going against 2 ACCs. Super good matchups. And Georgia Tech ended up beating Tennessee in 5, and Ole Miss ended up beating Florida State in 5. And I think Ole Miss just had such a great run. Obviously they only made it to the second round. They ended up losing to Creighton in straight sets. However, 2 of those sets against Creighton were just some incredible volleyball. Defense on both of the sides of the net were phenomenal. And yeah, I think it just goes to show that, oh my gosh, there's a wasp. Sorry. There's a wasp on my window, but we're good. It just goes to show that, Ole Miss was definitely one of those teams that people were kind of upset even made the tournament. They thought that, they didn't deserve to be in the tournament, and they didn't have the RPI, they didn't have the good wins, all that kind of stuff. And I even kind of was like, I mean, when you looked at, their resume going into the tournament, it really wasn't the best. They almost had a win against Texas to end their regular season, but then they just come out and it's almost like a team like them has nothing to lose. So why not just go out and play your best ball? And that's definitely what Ole Miss did. So just want to give a shout out to Ole Miss because they played incredible in those first 2 rounds. So we also have, so I guess now going into, I would say the 3 just best matches of the tournament so far. And I'm recording this before the Elite Eight and Final Four matches, so keep that in mind. But these were definitely my 3 favorites. The first one being the first one being Louisville versus UNI. I mean, that was just an incredible match. The just intensity on both sides, and I honestly feel so bad for UNI. Like, they literally had match point multiple times, but they could not deliver when it came to their serving. They just kept missing. And I just feel like in that moment, you just have to keep the ball in play. If Louisville sides out, they side out. But you have to at least give your team a chance to play defense, get a clutch block. I mean, there were so many blocks by both teams in that match. And yeah, they really bit themselves in the butt as far as those missed serves at the end went. And then also, I was really curious to see Louisville in, almost losing to UNI and how they would end up performing against Purdue. And they swept Purdue like it was nobody's business. That was probably, it was so wild because I feel like we saw the worst of Louisville volleyball against UNI, and we saw the absolute best of Louisville volleyball against Purdue. So huge difference between those two matches. And I was also thinking to myself, which teams we have actually seen their best. And I think Louisville is one of those teams. What we saw when Louisville played against Purdue, I think that's Louisville's best. And it was very good. It looked like Louisville looked like they could beat anybody in that match against Purdue. So yeah, that's where I'm at as far as Louisville volleyball goes right now. But sorry to go on a tangent. There's probably going to be a lot of random thoughts in my mind during this podcast episode, but it's the NCAA tournament, people. So second of my favorite matches was Mizzou versus SMU, which this was, again, such an incredible match. I feel like these two teams matched up so well. However, it was one of those matches where it was Mizzou almost didn't feel like the underdog, if that makes sense. I know it's kind of hard to explain, but Mizzou felt like it seemed like in that match that Mizzou was the 2 seed and SMU was the 7. I think that's what Mizzou was. Because Mizzou was just so dominant. And, I mean, they just looked like professionals out there when they were playing against SMU. I mean, Jordan Iliff, incredible right side for Mizzou. And then you had Michael Vernon just putting on a show. Marina Crownover also, doing her thing. And, obviously they should have honestly swept SMU by the looks of it. I mean, they almost did. That third set was probably, I would say that was probably the best set in the NCAA tournament so far. That third set, if you haven't watched it, it's probably on YouTube somewhere. Go and watch the third set, Mizzou versus SMU. It was some amazing volleyball. But that was a really good matchup. And although Mizzou ended up losing to Kentucky, it kind of also went to show that, maybe the SEC was a little underrated this year. And I'm also going to be talking about that in a little bit. Oop, there's another bug. And then the third match that was my favorites so far this tournament was Wisconsin versus Texas A&M, which was the Sweet 16 match. This one, I just feel like was so heartbreaking for Texas A&M. You can kind of compare this one to, oh my gosh, there's a bug. Anyways, you can kind of compare this one to the Louisville UNI match, except I feel like, and the Texas A&M team, I mean, they will always feel like they could have done more. I feel like I've never really lost a match in my career and never thought that I could have done more, but it really did seem like Texas A&M put their heart and soul into that match, and they came up short. And it was so heartbreaking to see the girls crying at the end, and their head coach Jamie Morrison literally exhausted because, I mean, they literally tried the best they could against a much bigger and stronger Wisconsin team. And it was also really funny because the Nebraska crowd was rooting for Texas A&M because obviously they don't want to play Wisconsin. And so they even had the home crowd with them. but it just wasn't enough. But gotta give credit to that team. They are actually returning every single one of their starters. I believe every single one of their starters next season, unless some of them transfer, which we're also going to be talking about the transfer portal later. But I mean, Logan Lednicki looked like the best player in college volleyball in that match. And I think definitely that's going to move her up as far as when I end up making my a part of Volleyball Mag, my All-America team. I think she's definitely going to move up as far as, and Volleyball Mag does 4 teams. They do first team, second team, third team, and fourth team. She moved up at least 1 team for me, in my personal opinion, if not 2 teams. So shout out Texas A&M, and overall just shout out the SEC. So that's what I'm going to get into next, was the fact that we saw a very different story when comparing how the SEC teams performed in the tournament and how the Big 12 teams performed in the tournament. So to begin, 9 teams from the SEC made the tournament, and everybody was outraged. Like, how could they allow 9 SEC teams to make the tournament? And the Big 12 had 6 teams make the NCAA tournament. Personally, should have thought Arizona should have also made the tournament, but my case for that honestly goes down a couple notches, because in the end, the SEC had 2 teams that were ranked in the top 4. They were in that top 4 seed that were supposed to go on to the Sweet 16. The Big 12 also had, did they have 2 or 3? They had 3. 3 of their teams. The Big 12 had 3 teams that were ranked high enough in terms of were supposed to go on to the Sweet 16. In the end, the SEC had 5 teams make the Sweet 16. And how many did the Big 12 have? 0. 0 teams. And it was just kind of crazy to think. So breaking it down, of the second round matches, we had Kentucky. I don't remember who Kentucky ended up beating to move on. Oh, holy shit. So we had Kentucky beating Minnesota to make it to the Sweet 16. We had Texas sweeping USC to make it to the Sweet 16. And then we had 3 upsets. We had Florida beating Kansas to move on. We had Texas A&M beating Arizona State to move on. And then, of course, we had Missouri beating SMU to move on. So some of those matchups were against Big 12 teams. And so that was also kind of crazy. So then to kind of reverse it, we had Kansas, the highest seed, or maybe it was Arizona State that had the higher seed, but we had Kansas losing to Florida. We had Arizona State losing to Texas A&M, Arizona State losing to Texas A&M. We had BYU losing in the first round, obviously, and then we had Baylor losing to Dayton, and then the last one was TCU ended up losing against, who did TCU lose to? And then we had TCU losing to Oregon. So all 5 of those teams, or all 6 of those teams, if you count out BYU losing in the first round, lost and didn't make it to the Sweet 16. So that was kind of a big story going into it, is, how did the Big 12 kind of, I don't even say beat up on each other enough to get as high of rankings as they did? And how did the SEC just kind of really go under the radar as far as their teams go? And that's definitely going to be a question mark going into the 2025-2026, the 2025 season, as far as, how we judge the RPI and, the non-conference. And because it really seemed like last season was oh man, the SEC showed out. But then when you looked at the ABCA top 25, I mean, there were barely any SEC teams that high up, and there were so many Big 12 teams. But clearly, I mean, the coaches had it wrong, but even the statistics, like, just had it incorrect. So it could also be a thing where it's, the SEC teams, when they went into the tournament, they just kind of balled out, played their best ball, and maybe the Big 12 teams played their worst ball. But yeah, that was just definitely an interesting thing for me in terms of watching the NCAA tournament as far as the conferences go. Now, obviously, as we went into the Elite Eight, 4 out of the 5 SEC teams lost. The only team that made it to the Elite Eight was Kentucky. But still, I mean, it's just crazy. It was a crazy phenomenon that we saw. So, and then before we move on to the transfer portal, because we are going to be talking about the transfer portal and like who's in it so far, I just want to express my grievances for the I want to express my grievances for the fact that Creighton is playing Penn State in the Elite Eight. Can we talk about that? Like, who allowed that matchup to happen in the Elite Eight? Like, I was genuinely shocked when I saw that. And, there are so many, people complaining about certain matchups that we would see in the future, especially Nebraska, Wisconsin, why are we seeing that in the Elite Eight? That kind of stuff. But the fact that Creighton is playing Penn State, like, what? First of all, I would say, honestly, Creighton and Penn State are probably 2 of my favorite teams this year. Probably one tied for my favorite, to be completely honest, when you look at like all of their players and stuff. And of course, their coaches, both being female. Like, come on, we still have not had a female coach win the national championship. And we're going to have 2 of the 3 that are still in contention play against each other before the Final Four. Like, what? Like, you've got to be kidding me. And yeah, first of all, I think it's going to be an amazing match. And it's probably the one that I'm most looking forward to out of all the Elite Eight matches. And again, once this is published, we'll know who the winner is. But either way, I'm just going to be so devastated for whichever team loses, because those 2 teams have worked so hard to be such dominant forces in NCAA volleyball this year. And yeah, it's just gonna be so devastating. NCAA committee, what the heck did you do? Like, y'all are breaking my heart. And I don't know how I didn't see this matchup sooner, but oh man. I think I may have ended up picking Creighton over Penn State, but I wasn't even thinking about just the matchup in general. So yes, very devastated for that. Yeah, I'm probably gonna cry, honestly. I'm probably gonna cry, but anyway, I just thought I'd bring that up. Obviously the other matchups, we have Stanford, Louisville again, we have Nebraska, Wisconsin again, but then we have Pitt, Kentucky, and that one can kind of get interesting because I do feel like we have been underestimating Kentucky this year. They took care of Minnesota. They took care of, I mean, they obviously took care of Missouri, but like, they looked really impressive. They've looked really impressive so far in the tournament. So if Pitt isn't at their best, it may not be enough to beat Kentucky, to be honest. Pitt's going to have to be good at passing and just have all of their ducks in a row, I think, to win it. So it's going to be a good one. So yeah. Okay, moving on to the NCAA transfer portal. If you guys haven't heard, it's opens. And it didn't just open. It opened, like, that door open, or window, I think they call it the window, that window flew open. We had quite a few high profile transfers enter so far, with most of them, if not all of them, of like the high profile ones being outside hitters. So that is really interesting. And I'm gonna preface by saying these are like not like 100% confirmed, but are at that like 90 to 95% certainty. There have been talks about it. Some of them have been posted to the College VB Transfers Instagram page. So those are like 99% confirmed. And then there's also been some chatter on Twitter from, key personnel in the college volleyball world, from Lincoln Arnell to Emily Eamon have been talking about some of these transfers. So it's with high confidence, and I wouldn't, if it wasn't at like a 90% sure that they're actually in the portal, I would not even be discussing it. So I just wanted to start with that. The Wasp is back. Urgh. Okay, so where's my list? Okay, so the first one is Kaylin Alexander from Hawaii. This one was really surprising. First of all, because she is a junior, gonna be a senior. So we don't really see a lot of those because it's like you have 1 year left. So it's like just stay at your school. But that's not the case anymore. And this one's interesting because Kaylin is from Georgia, but played at Hawaii and was a standout. She was like, this year she was like top three or top five in kills per set, points per set. Hawaii was nothing, and probably will be nothing unless they get a transfer, will be nothing without Kaylin Alexander. So that is, I'm very curious to see where she's going to end up, but I'm also curious to see how Hawaii is going to respond with losing Kaylin Alexander. So very interesting one. Next up, we have another outside hitter from the West Coast. Well, we actually have a lot of outside hitters from the West Coast. But we have Maggie Lee from Cal. And this one is probably at that 90% certainty. So, but she, if you don't know who Maggie Lee is, she is, you know, a top outside hitter at Cal. She's from China and is just a baller. And again, like, so much talent from her. And you know, ever since Lydia Grote transferred from Cal to Minnesota, like I think they would have been a good duo at Cal, but right now it's just really just her. And that one is also really interesting because she's an international player. We don't get a lot of players from that area of the world like China. China has a lot of volleyball talent, but they also really value the academic aspect of coming to the United States for education. So it's going to be really interesting to see where she ends up and whether that academic criteria and how much it is, how much it matters to her decision in where she transfers. So that one is also exciting and kind of like, very curious. Then we have Emmy Selman from Ohio State. She was a freshman and she started the season with an injury, but ended up kind of playing in the middle and the end of the season. And Emmy Selman is a phenomenal outside hitter. And Emmy Selman also wasn't the only one of Ohio State players to transfer. There were a total of 4, or there are 4 so far. Not, I wouldn't say, I would say with confidence 2, 3. Actually, no. So Lauren Murphy recently, there was a post in the college VB transfer. So yeah, I would say with confidence all 4 of those. And yeah, that was just, I don't have words. I don't have words for that. I might talk about it later. But yes, Emmy Selman, and my prediction is that she's going to stay in the Big Ten. And yeah, I'm so bad with like, I gotta share my hot takes, and I'm going to later, but I want to get through these transfers first. Okay, then we have Jaden Livings from USC. She was also a freshman, and she started like pretty much the entire season, but then after Wisconsin, didn't play the rest of the season, and we don't really know why, and that's kind of a question mark in how, you know, she's entered the transfer portal, but then also like didn't play with USC for, you know, the postseason and, you know, some matches there at the end. So that is definitely very interesting and a little sus, if I'm being honest, very sus. And yeah, I'm gonna be really curious to where she goes. She's from Texas, so I could definitely see her going back to a school in Texas. But yeah, that was honestly probably the most sus of all of them when we're talking about tampering, in my personal opinion. And then we have Aya El Nadi. She's gonna be a grad, but she's from Kansas. again, awesome outside hitter, just has so much fight in her and is honestly really inspired. Like, she's probably one of the most inspiring outside hitters that I watch. So very curious to see where she goes as well for her last year. And then the last one, we actually know where she's going. Grace Egan, the other outside hitter at Ohio State, is transferring to Wisconsin. This one is also interesting because, Wisconsin is still in the tournament, and Grace Egan entered and got picked up by Wisconsin very, very quickly. And I'm going to say, there are a lot of cases where a player will enter the portal and quickly be in contact with a school that was maybe their second choice in high school as far as committing. So they already kind of already have an idea of the school, and they've, talked with the coaches before. But I do still think there are cases where, and here goes the tampering part, and we don't know for sure. Like, we literally don't know for sure. And like, I'm not going to like make that assumption. However, there have been a lot of talks in the volleyball world that tampering is occurring. And how it's occurring, it's actually occurring two separate ways. The first way is college coaches are seeing, oh, this player's really good, but she's not on a good team. Let me see if she wants to transfer to us. So how they go about doing this is they reach out to the player's club coach, like the coach that they had in club, reach out to them, give them an idea of, hey, does this person want to enter the portal? If so, would they be interested in, our school? And there's also times where, money will get involved, like we have our NIL collective, we can offer X amount of money per month. And this isn't just happening in volleyball, guys. Like, this is happening probably to a much larger extent in football, men's basketball, and I don't even say baseball, but definitely football and men's basketball. It's definitely happening where athletes are able to like have money be a factor in whether they want to stay at a school or transfer. And I think it's really sad because it's kind of ruining the spirit of the sport. Obviously, I think players should be able to take advantage of their name, image, and likeness, but I don't think it should be the sole reason of why you're playing for the program that you're playing at. You should be playing at the program because you want to win a national championship. You love your teammates. You love your coach. And again, so I'm going to be talking about what Amy Polly said on her Twitter. If you guys don't know, I had Amy Polly on my last podcast episode where we talked about PVF, Orlando Valkyries in the NCAA bracket. So if you haven't watched that, be sure to go watch that. But Amy Polly was putting out a lot of tweets during this whole transfer portal. And I know Amy Polly because, she's really deep into that college volleyball sphere and knows a lot of people. And she's saying that it's 1000% happening. And, she said this one thing, and I gotta find the tweets. She said, recruits, stop saying you want to be a part of a family. Families hold each other accountable. Families have hard conversations. Families disagree. Families stick together through families stick together through all the above. And I think this just kind of is intertwined with this whole NIL thing, is that, like, when the going gets tough, are you just going to drop everything and leave? Or are you gonna like not give up on your team and your program that you committed to in the first place? And I think and again, I transferred schools, so I completely understand, one, what the process is of deciding whether to transfer or not, two, when you enter the portal, how it goes, and the fact that like there are so many reasons why you can transfer. And I don't think we should necessarily judge and assume that this person is transferring for this reason. However, I think it's just sad that players are getting to the point where they want to transfer solely for the money, and not just in volleyball, in football, basketball. many other sports. So that's sort of my 2 cents on that sort of aspect of everything, is that, y'all, tampering is happening and it's starting at the club level. And I actually made a video on TikTok about this recently, is that volleyball clubs, not all of the bigger volleyball clubs, but some of the bigger volleyball clubs, they only care about making money. And if that means making sure that their athletes go to the best possible school as possible to kind of increase their image, to get other players to come play for their club, they're going to do that regardless of if that school is even the athlete's best fit. And I have a story of a athlete, and she kind of shared this in Instagram DMs. I'm not going to say what her name is, but she was talking about how her club, I'm also not going to say the club, was their club recruiting coordinator was kind of encouraging this athlete, and this athlete wanted to go to a school in her state. She wanted to stay in state, close to family. Did not matter if it was D1, D2, D3. Didn't matter the division. She wanted to go to a school that was close to home and have a great college experience. And the only schools that this club recruiting coordinator, helped her in her journey with, like, the college coaches, were from schools that were only D1 and only from all the way on the other side of the country. And that's literally not what the athlete wanted. So you want to know what the athlete did? She took it upon her own hands to do the recruiting all by herself and ended up going to an amazing program. And I think she's still doing really well. So yeah, that's just an example. And that's even like a small scale example of what's going on in the club volleyball world. So anyways, sorry to go on a tangent, but again, the transfer portal tampering is starting with these club coaches in wanting to improve their image. And, hey, if this college coach wants my alumni to go to transfer to their school, and maybe that school will also look at this player that's on my 16s team, then I'm going to do that. And it's like just so annoying. So yes, that is sort of my opinion on the transfer portal and all of that. And again, I think it's getting to a point where you can't just call out one program for it, one college program, sorry. Because when one college program did it and got away with it, so are practically, and I've heard from people, it is a lot of programs. So anyways, I'm going to sort of end it at that. But yes, thank you guys so much for tuning into this episode. Let me know in the comments on Spotify, on YouTube, any of that kind of stuff, what kind of topics you want me to talk about next. And stay tuned, because I'm going to be making what I'm going to call the... I actually don't know what I'm going to call it yet. I think I'm going to call it the Volley Takes All-America or All-American teams. And it's going to be voted on by you guys. So stay tuned for that and the rules and all of that kind of stuff as far as that goes. But yes, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I'll see you guys in 2 weeks. Bye.